Okay, thanks, Sam, and welcome everyone who's joined us so far for today's conversation. Our vodcasts are a series of conversation with strata experts about how to build effective committees. The focus of our conversations will be around contemporary issues and the human factors rather than the legal requirements, though we might touch on those. In the first of the 6 episodes, we explored why people volunteer to be on a committee, their experience of joining a committee, and what are the most important steps for a committee to do from day one, and managing your manager. In the next 6 weeks, we then explored with David Hamilton, give us a wave, David, how to prepare your building for electrical vehicles and the right way and the wrong way to go about it. All of these recordings are available on our website for you to download and to listen to. So, and I can recommend it. They're all great conversations as we talk to our wonderful panel of committee members and experts as we go through these conversations. You can find those, and Sam might just drop that into the chat box for everyone.
Yes, I will do that.
Yeah, there's a link, save me reading it all out. You go there and you look for the owner's information tile, which is up the top, and then you'll be able to see the owner's vodcast tile, and in there you'll get all of the conversations. Today we welcome back our regular panel members of Catherine Lezar and David Hamilton to the conversation. Our panel members are lot owners, very involved with their committees and their owners' corporations. Catherine has experience of multi-storey apartment living, many project improvements, and with a particular passion for sustainability. David, also a high-rise dweller, is our EV expert and quite an expert just around buildings generally and how they work, which is always good in these conversations. But he's also one of the founders of Southbank 3006, the new and emerging voice of owners in our CBD. And, on that note, last week, David and I met with Fred Tuckwell and Tom Wilson from Owners Corporation Network New South Wales. And we discussed the various, we discussed a number of things. It was a lot around EV and getting the terminology common, understanding what the common position is for owners and also buildings, and where, the current risks are coming from and how we might frame those risks, and very much so that OCN and SCA are singing from the same song sheet, and that we support each other, which is a position that we're more than happy to do that. And we also want to work together to further advocate in that sustainability space. So David and I have already sort of started to have those conversations, which is all about Victoria, though. So this podcast, of course, whilst I am in Victoria, Catherine is from Western Australia, and our guest, Will, who we're going to meet in a minute, he represents a company that is Australia-wide as well. But sustainability is the hot topic, of course. In one of our previous podcasts, we did briefly touch on solar, and we talked about the information guides that have been developed through collaboration of Marybeck Council and City of Yarra, and they are fantastic guides that talk about how to put solar on your apartments, and they also have a second guide about the electrification of your apartment building, and that's a really great starting point for owners corporations that are looking to go down that line, because it gives you that concept of what you're trying to achieve, and identify some of the things that you'll need to understand or get further help on. So those are available on their websites. And we had previously, they may even have already been uploaded onto our website. But even more recently, SEA met with DECA, who's our local government energy body, and Solar Vic, who's their agency that is rolling out the solar program here for Victoria. And this is what brought my attention to the Illume product, because it was very clear to me that they have crafted the whole rebate program based on the Illume product. This may be, and it's particularly around a product called Soul Share. this might be fantastic news, and it might also be very alarming. Hence why we're having this conversation today, because I don't know. I'm not going to profess to be any expert, and that's part of what we're going to do. Panel, we are charged with unpacking this product and its relevance to the strata sector. I can see its relevance, in solar generally, of course, and the whole of government, as we know, just talks about single home dwelling. The fact that they've even considered strata is, amazing. But so, Will, when we get into our discussion, I want to frame it specifically around this. And that is that it is a strata multi-unit development dwelling. And we are not talking about single homes here. So our villas and townhouses, this is not actually directed for you, and you qualify for those rebates, no problem. It's for everyone else who's been left out. And secondly, that strata lot owners around Australia own the common property as tenants in common. So whatever part of that common property is, it's shared by all owners, not just to the exclusive use of some people to use and abuse however they want. And that includes obviously contributing to expenses, and also then any revenue opportunities that flow from the common property is shared amongst all owners based on their ownership entitlement. So that's my framing, Will, because that's the part we want to unpack in order to assist government to understand the barriers. We kind of I need that, the conversation to have that in mind, okay? And I know from my reading that governments, not only here in Australia, but also in New Zealand, are really focused on this sole share product. So clearly there's a real benefit there. And so now we need to, unpick that. And before we specifically just jump into sole share, Will, but the first question does go to you, is has Illume summarised the rebates or incentives out there for solar that are potentially there from local government, state government, and federal government in a nice little easy to read table?
Thanks, Julian. Good to be a part of the podcast as well. We not formally, we find that it's an ever-changing, space now. More on the New South Wales side, we've seen a lot of engagement with councils. Victoria, not so much on the rebate side of things, unfortunately, which I'd love to see change. So really excited to see the state government pushing for that. The components of this lot of funding is really, really exciting. And it is all thanks to the federal solar banks initiatives that came through from the federal election. But apart from that, it's all your standard, your solar STCs that you get from your panels that are really applicable for this sort of thing. But very little rebates when it comes to strata, unfortunately, up until now.
Yeah, so the federal grant that you just mentioned, that actually just flows through to the state bodies. Like, it's not something we can apply for directly to federal. Is that how you read it? It's actually, yes, there's a bundle of money, but it's being given to each of the states for them to hand out and manage as they see fit.
Yeah, that's
okay. So all right. So the table wouldn't have a federal column. If we ever get to create this table, it'll be all about state and state agencies, and then potentially councils in that. So Catherine, just seeing council is one of your wheelhouse.
Yes.
What happens in WA? Is there a rebate at the council level there for you, or is Victoria really behind? Or
No. WA is also forgetting about strata generally in the policymaking space. We have had, since I've been on council, we have had a little bit of success getting City of Perth Council to do some grants and rebates, but it's mostly for reporting upfront, so that they're happy to pay for the reports to do the initial work, but they haven't got so far as to do the next part yet. But we're advocating hard for it. And now, since City of Perth have introduced some grants and they've got 2 different grant streams, some of the other councils are following along as well. So that's helpful. But so Will, I came across Illume years and years ago in New South Wales when I was there, and I remember you giving us a nice tour in Newtown. But can you explain now this sole share product and how it distributes all the benefits to the different people in the strata, and also, of course, talk about the common property. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. And yeah, glad to know that you've got a little bit of experience with it. I think the biggest thing to sort of note is just on the lack of rebates previously is, I guess, SolShare's created to put the ownership of the solar with the strata itself, which has been very hard to do and actually provide it directly to apartments. So we find that, well, when it's installed on a site, so as an example, for, say, a bit of a test case, let's say we take a 12 apartment building. Now that 12 apartments, you know, it might be a 3-story, 12 apartment building. For argument's sake, there's a little bit of roof area. As we know, that is common ownership roof area. So it is there owned by everyone in a way that is generally, you know, people contribute to that as per strata lot entitlement, from what we see. Now, with the key thing with apartments is if you're going to go and put solar on the rooftop, you really want to be able to connect everyone within the building and provide a shared equitable allocation of solar in a way that it meets what we see is their strata lot entitlements as being really important. So with that, we actually physically connect behind the meter one shared system, so there's direct solar provided to every apartment. Now, in doing that, we take one solar PV array on the rooftop. So, you know, in this example of 12 apartments in a 3-story building, let's say that's 25 kilowatts of solar, is quite a cookie cutter sort of approach for that building type. From that, you'll have one shared inverter that offers, converts all of that solar power directly to AC power that can be used within the building to power different things. Now, this is where the magic happens. So that's where from the inverter to the SolShare is where the solar comes into. And the SolShare itself is very similar to, say, being a solar splitter, is one way I like to put it, or a smart solar diverter. So we physically have one input into the SolShare and then up to 15 outputs off the SolShare. So with that, if we have 12 apartments, we'd be able to physically connect behind the meter for a solar supply for each and every apartment, as well as then combining that with a common area connection as well. So that the, you know, building services meter, that might be your
So there'd be 13 connections in that example?
Yeah,
right.
100%. So sometimes the common area is 3-phase, you know, apartments might be single phase, so we can make it work as well. And then when you set that system up, you can then allocate the energy per calendar month as per strata lot entitlement. But on an instantaneous basis, you can share the entire system with any individual pretty much. So it means that you get really, really efficient use of the rooftop that you have and the panels you have. A bit of an analogy would be is if you had a suburban street with, say, 12 individual homes, you know, standalone homes, and you could all share each other's solar. That's not allowed from a regulatory standpoint. But when we bring that to an apartment building, we can actually share those panels as long as you include SolShare.
But it's nothing to do with, it's not a metering system. No.
No, not at all. So we do, in saying that, we do measure all of the solar. So every individual resident gets to see what their solar is being provided to them instantaneously, as well as what their demand for energy is. So you actually get your full energy usage profile, and it really encourages people to actually, you know, use their solar better and see which times of the day there's solar available, and to then sort of maximize that benefit.
Okay, and because it's behind the meter, does it matter which energy provider that they are signed up with?
No, that's the best thing.
Yeah,
and
right.
This, where we came from originally was social housing. That's where sort of SolShare came through, because the freedom of choice for people in apartments was really, really important when it came to their energy retailers. Now, in saying that, whether they're an embedded network or whether there might be a grid connected apartment where you can choose your retailer, it really doesn't matter. We're behind the meter in both scenarios. So we make sure the ownership of the system and the full 100% benefit sits with the owners of the building. And then whoever has that electricity account, you know, whether it's a renter in, you know, a landlord situation or an owner occupier, they get the full benefit in the same way that you would if you had a standalone home with solar on the rooftop. So it's transferring that to apartments.
Okay, and so sorry, Julie. So there's still a split incentive, however, because the solar panels will be on the roof of the common property, but the renter hypothetically is getting the benefit. And so the owners have to approve it. The owners have to put it on the roof. the roof has to be structurally sound and all those kind of things, which is common owner's expense, but the benefit flows through to the occupier, which may or may not be a tenant. It may or may not be an owner-occupier.
Yeah, that's
Is that correct?
Yeah, so you'll still get some savings through the common area bill as well. So that's really important that although it's not going to offset the total cost, the landlord will still be receiving a savings benefit. Generally, there's some tax incentives of investing in your non-permanent place of residency, depending on the person situation. Property value has been also a really big, interesting thing. There's been quite a few studies, UNSW and all the real estate websites that say that increases the value of your property. A lot of sustainability upgrades by about 10 to 12%. And even if it wasn't anywhere near that, the investment is very small in the scheme of things. But that is where, because of the high number of renters that do live in apartments and the landlord situations, that's where it is really important for state government, federal government, all layers of government to sort of support the transition for these buildings in the urbanised environments.
Interesting. So I just want to unpack the 15 outputs conversation. Is the 15 outputs tied to the 25 kilowatt as the example we're talking about? Or is the 15 outputs a limitation in the system, meaning it doesn't matter how big the solar array is, there is still only 15 outputs? And in which case, do the same example, but with 20 lots. What does that mean to the, say, 20 lots instead of 12? What have we had? 12, I think.
Yeah, of course, surely. So if we take an example, so SoulShare is set up to be modular in that sense. So each SoulShare has a maximum of 15 outputs on that. Through a lot of market research, we found that to be the sweet spot, and I'll explain a little bit why. With that, you can connect up to 22 kilowatts AC, so whatever inverter capacity, to that SoulShare. Now, the reason it's structured to that size is to ensure that basically if you have an apartment connected, they still sit within the residential market when it comes to the amount of solar they're provided as well. So if we take that example with the 26 kilowatts on the rooftop, which is generally a 20 kilowatt inverter, the standard oversizing. With that, with 12 apartments, you'd have just a little bit under 2 kilowatts per apartment on average. Now, with the way SoulShare works with this structure, you can still access up to 6.6 instantaneously, which means, it's very similar to a standalone home. But as we know, apartments use a lot less energy than a standalone home. They're quite thermally insulated with each other. Now, if we take that to, say, a 20 apartment building, Julie, we'd have, say, 2 SoulShare modules. Now, the key thing about this to note as well, as I'm sure you guys are aware, where the meters are located within buildings can vary significantly. So the electricity meter boards, so where all the old dials or now smart meters sit, are either usually co-located per building, on the ground floor or basement, or more on the larger sites, they are per floor. So it might be every couple of floors, or it might be every floor. And because of that, it isn't feasible to, say, have a 60 output SoulShare on the ground floor and cable accordingly. So in this case, if we have, say, a 20 apartment complex, we'd have units 1 to 10 connected to SoulShare 1 with an associated inverter and PV array. Now, that's a singular system. Those 1 to 10 residents would be able to share that solar from that SoulShare and the panels. And then units 11 to 20 would have a separate SoulShare with a separate inverter and panels to then offer solar to these guys as well. So it just stays within the parameters of how much solar they can be provided. And in those cases, if you had that 20 apartments and let's say it was a 4-story building, 5 meters per floor, we could have a SoulShare situated every 2 floors to then cable up or cable down a floor to cover all the metering costs, like connections to the metering, which means it's a lot cheaper then to actually retrofit to sites as well. So I guess the infrastructure cost is really key for a lot of these projects to get off the ground.
Does it need any room? Does it need room, Will? I mean, obviously, your inverters need room and ventilation. Does your system need room and ventilation?
Well, with the inverters, they can be located anywhere. So a lot of the time, the inverters are actually located on the roof in some cases. Yes. And then you've just got one single cable that will come down to a SoulShare. Now, ideally, the SoulShare is basically installed as close to as possible as the relevant meters that it will be connected to sort of minimize, because that's where you've got however many apartments cabling. So if you can sit it next to that meter board on the same floor, if there's enough meters there, that's excellent. But a lot of the times, it could be in a not so much stairwell these days, but a spare cupboard, or electrical cupboard or electrical room. It is quite varied, and it really is a site-by-site sort of scenario. And we sort of sit that with whoever the solar installer is that's been engaged by the strata to deliver the overall project. We let them sort of decide that in collaboration with the strata, I guess the committee, and the rest of the residents too. But the soul share itself, about similar size to an inverter for reference, but arguably a little bit nicer looking, I would say.
So just going back, so we're saying if we have more apartments, we just add another soul share, plug it on, which is good. But that's assuming we have the roof space to do that. So if we looked at our example of, the 12 lots, they had a roof to support the 22 kilowatts, but that we could be talking about just another couple of levels on that same building to get the 20, and we've still got the same roof space. What happens then? So we haven't got the ability to plug to 2 lots of soul share unless we're doing something very clever, vertical mounts, or having a solar tree or something. But so how does that how do we then cater then? What is the magic solution at that point?
It's a very real I guess issue, Julie. Like, we don't provide a solution for every single apartment complex. We would say anything, we like to sit within the 6 to 100 apartment as a general rule, 6 to 100 apartment sort of space, and generally 1 to 8 stories. Now, that is a bit of a fluid sort of number. It is really dependent on your available roof space, of course. But we find that it really is a little bit of understanding what the energy usage is within the building as well. So the biggest thing that when people that aren't well versed in strata overestimate the amount of the amount of energy or electricity that is consumed by apartments. Now, with that, we see, based on use case examples, we see a lot of sites have as little as 1 kilowatt of solar on average per apartment. So in that 12 apartment complex example, you could get away with 12 kilowatts of solar. It really is dependent on what is suitable for the apartment complex, and then looking at the return on investment sort of period as well, and what's viable. Now, in saying that, we are also working with some sort of new builds in the passive house sort of design space. And we have some installs with as little as 0.5 kilowatts of solar per apartment on average, with the ability to access up to 3 kilowatts peak at any point in time, depending on when you have demand for energy. So even with those sites, you're looking at a 20 to 30% reduction in your energy consumption from the grid. But generally, we do sit at that 1.5 to 2 kilowatts of solar per apartment. But it all depends on the roof space. We always recommend getting that looked at. Panels are pretty efficient these days. So what didn't work 3 years ago is a lot more likely to work these days as well.
And I noticed on the case studies, there is a case study. Well, there's at least one in Victoria, but you've got case studies in New South Wales in particular, because that seems to be, I'll say, where the most amount of work was started, at least, was from that focus there. In the one that I think it was Box Hill, was it Box Hill, the Victorian, or Doncaster, or somewhere? Anyway, there. Do you know what size property that was?
I think it might have been the Mirvac, our Folier Apartments, which would have been about 70 kilowatts, 30 89 apartments connected. Now, that was an interesting one because they didn't connect every apartment within the complex. So with that, they only did around half the apartments and used it as a feature item for all the premium and penthouse apartments within the building. So although we focus a lot with social housing directly with state government and community housing providers, we find that people want to get what they are entitled to in that sense, or they have the ownership for. And we found that worked really, really well in the high value apartment property sort of space as well. Now, with that, we are also done the site next door to that, which is very similar. They've only done a portion of the apartments with solar. There are, I guess, owners corporation considerations around that, because there is a subset of residents within the apartment building that then have to maintain that, asset. But that is quite common. Yeah. So I may not have answered your question fully there, Julie. So
No, but it
it
is interesting, and it gives me the segue across to David, because that's the same kind of parallel conversation that we're having in EV land as we roll out EVs, like with early adopters, and then, so let's say in your last example there, well, let's call those early adopters people with solar panels, but not everybody. And then, yes, how that from a benefit principle, as we call it here in Victoria, which is about, user pays kind of idea. David, what are our like a lot of this stuff you've gone through with working through buildings with that in just sorting out what is common property or what should be a common expense. So we've got our early adopters that we're gearing up to provide this service to, but a lot of in providing that service requires an upgrade of common property infrastructure. And so that's established a kind of a pathway, if you like, about what ought to be paid by everyone and then what ought to be split and charged only to the people who benefit. Do you want to just touch on that? Because you've done quite a few, you're up to about 45 buildings or something, aren't you?
50 now, 50 and
50, yeah.
15 retrofitting. Yes, so I think there, and it's slightly, there are some parallels, but it's ironically it's slightly easier because the infrastructure that we're retrofitting has a defined point, a defined point in it where you can say this is the common infrastructure and everybody benefits, and we can then define the benefit is that anybody at a time future can add EV to their car park, make their own car park EV ready. The building as a whole is EV ready, therefore there's a value uplift and it is more attractive to the market. We're also aided now because the National Construction Code has followed the model that developed outside of the code for retrofitting, is it implemented it for new builds, so that for new builds in Class 2 buildings, we have a defined package of infrastructure which is common and available to anybody when they arrive in a building. Despite saying that, there are actually developers who are bringing product to market now, or launching product, I should say, where they followed that sort of the marketing example. They will put all of the infrastructure in, but they're going to make it available as a package for the first 100 people will get the final circuit. That is the link from the distribution board to the car park and probably a charger as well. So we tend to, so in retrofitting, we say the final circuits and the charger are an individual owner's expense, as is the electricity that they consume. The infrastructure, the core backbone from the main switchboard through to and including the distribution board and the load management system is a common property. It's a common feature, benefit that every owner is delivered as a result of the upgrade. So everybody pays for that. And we make those, what's really important, as you know, Julie, in Victoria, is that a committee has to make a collective, conscious decision at the outset and ascribe the costs appropriately at that point, not after the event when it's done the project, but right before it starts.
Yep, when it raises the levy.
That's right. So then that makes it incredibly clear to everybody, this is why we're doing it, and these are the benefits you're going to get. I actually have an interesting question for Will, and that is, because I come across a number of buildings which have already got solar arrays, and they've obviously entered into long-term deals with somebody who put the array on the roof with a declining feed-in tariff. So somewhere in this discussion, it would be good to know, Will, how do you tackle that? because there will be people on this call from OC managers who have that very environment that they face. So can they take advantage of what is a really great product, which is now available in the market, but after a whole chunk of the market has already been gobbled up by the people who ran around offering, you can feel good, I'll have a solar array, I'll sell you that. And in fact, some of them may have disappeared and gone into liquidation. So there's a whole, that's an entirely different game, which is what happened to all of those panels that you can no longer get support for. But okay.
It's an interesting thing, David, and we find that predominantly the biggest scenario that we see is the strata or the owners corporation will have put on, a large PV array, solar array just for the common area.
Yep.
And they should have full ownership and they should have paid for it up front. But you do see those cases in some of the much larger buildings, especially embedded networks, where they don't have that ownership of that system. And there is, I'd say, probably a split benefit depending on the scenario set up and I guess negotiated, whether it was directly with the original developer or if they did retrofit an embedded network in that scenario. I always am of the opinion that it is your roof space as a strata building, so you should get the full benefit from that, and really implore sort of stratas to make sure that they prioritize that. But in doing so, obviously, there hasn't been a lot of government support in years gone by to facilitate that to happen. So can completely understand that there are some buildings in unique situations, but from our experience, and I've probably come across thousands of buildings myself, for the ones that we've dealt with and have been interested with us, it is definitely a minority. But a lot of those common area only systems that we see that just benefit the common area, lifts, etc. A lot of those can actually be adapted to be combined with SolShare as well. It's a little bit harder. You want to keep with the same contractor who has delivered that sort of system to sort of add on to that, but it is something that can be made possible to sort of amplify the benefit.
Okay.
The unfortunate reality is a lot of those common area systems export a far majority of the solar that they produce.
One final question, because it is a very short little conversation, but we can certainly have another one on this, because I think it's an evolving space to look at, or particularly in Victoria, and that is with the rebate, and only because Loom must be part of these conversations for them to be in the state of mind that they are. Does Loom then do the application for the rebate as part of that conversation? How at the moment I'm getting inundated by hundreds of, do you want to put solar on your roof? Contact us kind of idea. In other words, it's going through the contractor who's providing the service rather than the owners corporation applying direct for the rebate. Is that how you see it happening? It's going to be, if we want to put solar on, we call up a Loom to put the solar on and they get the rebate? Is that how that happens, or?
No, so it'll be no different to any other solar rebate that Solar Victoria has provided in the past. So generally the solar installer will work with, in a standalone home scenario with the homeowner, or generally the homeowner. In this scenario, as far as we know, without, I guess, final parameters being announced, is that the committee itself or the owners corporation itself will apply with the solar contractor or the solar installer delivering the project. And they will apply to Solar Victoria to access that rebate. Okay. So we aren't part of the conversation at all in any way, shape, or form in those scenarios. But we can, we provide guidance. We can provide guidance where required. But otherwise, there's a lot of, fully impartial representatives that can help with that as well. Okay, but they have got to have at least partnered up with a provider to apply for the rebate. Yeah. Okay. 100%. Because in the Victorian upgrade program, which is different equipment, heat pumps, air conditioners, that kind of stuff, it's the opposite. It's the contractor who's the person who's filling out the form.
and gets. That's why I asked that question. I just wasn't sure if you knew, because they haven't quite finished the development of that side. So that's it.
It'll be dependent on what the means testing aspect is, I think, because they want to, obviously renters and low income is a big focus, but also keeping it simple for everyone as well, because it is only 5,000 rebates, so it's not massive.
Well, exactly. And that I know they have already basically put a limit of the size of building that they're talking about. So it's not, and I think they're aiming at sort of 20 lots and under. So it's not the 100, the 100 lots. And yes, while it sounds like it's a big number, it's just not enough, and it's not going to do really anything. But I guess in terms of eligibility, given that 50% of the strata scheme is rented, at least we tick a box there. And of those, probably a further 25% of our 50% are already being used by social housing. So particularly in those smaller schemes like that, not so much in the high rises, but in the smaller schemes. Department of Housing and their agencies are one of the big landlords that we do see. So, well, that's amazing, but we've come to the end of our time for today. Look, thank you, Will, and we will definitely, have you back as we get the next stage out, and we'll unpick that a bit further and learn some more. But I'm excited. I now understand, the limitations and how that might work. But given I know that they're looking at that sort of 20 lot scenario, it's most likely that it'll be a system where everybody benefits, so we don't have to have this, fight over common property and exclusive use and all, which would be nice if that was the case. But yeah, so Catherine and David, again, thank you for coming. Is there any other quick question you wanted to throw at Will or whatever for this session? If not, we will see you next month and for another committee conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
George.
everyone.
Having me.
Bye.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Thanks, Julie.